When a banker loans money, he believes in documentation. He was 74, spent 50 years in London's financial sector, never made a deal without contracts. She was 37, an accountant from Makati with spreadsheets that looked bulletproof. He gave her £510,000 as a loan, complete with repayment terms, interest rates, and signed agreements. 2 years later, he's still waiting for the first payment that was never meant to come. I was sitting across from Isla at a cafe in Makati, watching her tap numbers into her calculator with the kind of precision that made me trust her instantly. "So if we structure it this way," she said, turning the screen toward me, "the return on investment over 24 months would be 18%. That's significantly better than anything you'd get in a UK savings account." I studied the numbers. She'd laid out the entire proposal in a detailed spreadsheet. Projected cash flows, payment schedules, risk assessments. It looked exactly like the kind of analysis I'd reviewed thousands of times during my banking career. "And you're confident you can generate these returns?" I asked. She nodded. "The real estate market here is booming. I have connections with developers who need bridge financing. I provide the capital, they pay back with interest, I pay you back with your share. It's a simple arbitrage opportunity. Why not just go to a bank?" Banks here move slowly. By the time they approve a loan, the opportunity is gone. Private lending fills that gap. I've been doing this for 3 years, never missed a payment to an investor. She pulled out a folder and showed me testimonials from other investors. Letters of thanks, bank statements showing regular deposits. Everything looked legitimate. I'd been in the Philippines for 4 months at that point, came over after my wife passed away, needed to get away from London, from the memories, from the empty house. My daughter suggested I travel for a while, clear my head. I'd planned to stay a few weeks, but something about Manila drew me in. The energy, the warmth, the feeling that life was still happening here, unlike the quiet retirement I'd been dreading back home. I met Isla through a mutual acquaintance at an expat networking event. She was polished, professional, articulate. When I mentioned I'd worked in banking for 50 years, she lit up. "I could really use your expertise," she'd said. "I'm growing my private lending business, but I don't have anyone with serious financial experience to help me structure deals properly." We started meeting for coffee. She'd ask my advice on contracts, risk management, due diligence. I was flattered that someone valued my expertise. Retirement had made me feel invisible. Isla made me feel useful again. After about 6 weeks of these consultations, she made her pitch. "I have more opportunities than capital right now. Would you ever consider investing directly? I could offer you significantly better returns than you're getting sitting in cash." I was hesitant at first, but she wasn't asking for a gift. She was proposing a formal loan with clear terms. "I'll draft a proper loan agreement," she said. "Fixed interest rate, monthly payments, full repayment within 24 months. You'll have legal documentation for everything." That's what convinced me. The documentation. In banking, documentation is everything. If it's written down and signed, it's enforceable. We met 3 more times to hammer out the details. Isla prepared a comprehensive loan agreement. It specified that I would loan her £510,000. She would pay me monthly interest at 6% per annum. The principal would be repaid in full at the end of 24 months. She showed me her business registration, her accountant credentials, references from developers she'd worked with, bank statements showing healthy cash flows. "I want you to feel completely comfortable with this," she said. "This is a business arrangement, not a favor between friends. Everything will be formal and professional." I had my lawyer in London review the contract. He raised some concerns. "This is governed by Philippine law, not UK law. If she defaults, enforcement will be difficult." "She's not going to default," I said. "I've done my due diligence. Her business is solid." Still, £510,000 is a substantial sum. You're essentially giving her your entire liquid savings. It's a loan, not a gift, and the returns justify the risk. He wasn't convinced, but he couldn't point to anything specifically wrong with the contract. It was well drafted, clear, comprehensive. I transferred the money in 3 installments over 2 weeks. Each time, Isla provided a signed receipt. We met with a notary to have everything officially witnessed. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said after the final transfer. "You won't regret it." The first month, I received my interest payment exactly on schedule, £2,550 deposited directly into my account, right on time. The second month, same thing, perfect timing, perfect amount. I started to relax. This was going to work exactly as planned. Isla and I stayed in regular contact. She'd update me on the deals she was funding, show me the returns she was generating. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Around month 4, I noticed the payment was 2 days late. I texted her, "Just checking on this month's payment. Haven't seen it come through yet." She responded immediately, "So sorry. Bank holiday delayed the transfer. Processing it now." The payment came through that afternoon. Month 5, the payment was on time again. Month 6, it was 5 days late. "Sorry, Zacharias. One of my developers was slow paying me, so I was waiting for their funds to clear before I could pay you. All sorted now." The explanation made sense. In private lending, timing issues happen. I'd seen it countless times in my career, but I made a note of it. 2 late payments in 6 months. Not a pattern yet, but something to watch. Month 7, the payment didn't come at all. I waited a week before reaching out. "Isla, I haven't received this month's payment. Is everything all right?" No response. I tried calling. It went to voicemail. I sent another text. "Please let me know what's going on. I'm starting to worry." 3 days later, she finally replied, "I'm so sorry for the silence. I've been dealing with a family emergency. My father had a stroke. I've been at the hospital non-stop. I'm very sorry to hear that. Is he okay?" "He's stable now, thank God. I'll get your payment sorted this week. Again, my apologies for the delay." The payment came through 5 days later, with an extra £200 as an apology for the delay. "I never want you to think I'm not taking this seriously," she wrote. "You've been so good to me." I felt guilty for pushing her when she was dealing with a family crisis. Of course, there would be occasional hiccups. Life happens. Month 8, the payment was on time. Month 9, it was 2 weeks late. No explanation, just eventually showed up. Month 10, I had to ask 3 times before it came through. I started to feel uneasy. The pattern was becoming clear. Payments were getting later and more irregular. I asked to meet with Isla in person. She suggested a coffee shop in Makati. When she arrived, she looked stressed, tired. "Is everything okay with the business?" I asked. "It's been challenging lately. The market is tighter than it was. Some of my regular developer clients are taking longer to close deals." "Are you having trouble generating the returns you projected?" "Not trouble, exactly. Just slower than anticipated. But it's temporary. The fundamentals are still strong." "Isla, I need to be honest with you. The irregular payments are concerning me. In our agreement, payments were supposed to be monthly like clockwork. I know. I'm sorry. I'm doing my best. Maybe we should consider restructuring. If cash flow is tight, we could adjust the payment schedule." She shook her head firmly. "No, that won't be necessary. Things will stabilize soon. I promise you'll get every penny you're owed. I'm not worried about getting paid. I just want to make sure the arrangement is sustainable for both of us." "It is. Trust me." That word, trust. It was becoming a shield she used whenever I asked difficult questions. Month 11, no payment came at all. I called her repeatedly. She didn't answer. I sent emails, no response. I showed up at her office address. The space was empty. A "for lease" sign in the window. My stomach dropped. I tried to stay calm. Maybe she just moved offices. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. I reached out to the mutual acquaintance who'd introduced us. Have you heard from Isla recently? Not in months. Why? I'm trying to reach her about a business matter. She seems to have disappeared. Disappeared? That's strange. She was always so professional. I spent the next week trying every possible avenue to contact her. Nothing worked. Finally, she sent me a text message. Zacharias, I know you've been trying to reach me. I'm sorry for going silent. I'm going through some things right now, and I need space. I will pay you back everything I owe. Just give me some time. How much time? I don't know. A few months maybe. Isla, we have a contract. You're supposed to be making monthly payments. You've missed 2 in a row now. I'm aware of that. I told you, I'm dealing with some challenges. What kind of challenges? Personal things. I don't want to get into it. This is a business arrangement. I need to know what's happening with my money. She didn't respond for 2 days. Then, fine. You want to know? My father's medical bills wiped out my savings. I had to pull money from the business to cover his care. I'm rebuilding now, but it takes time. I felt terrible. Of course, she was prioritizing her father's health. What kind of person would I be to pressure her during a family crisis? I'm very sorry about your father, but we need to have a serious conversation about the loan. Can we meet? Not right now. I'm not in Manila. Where are you? Cebu, taking care of family matters. When will you be back? I don't know. That was the last direct communication I had with her for 3 months. I tried to be patient, tried to tell myself that she'd sort out her family issues and then we'd get back on track. But in the back of my mind, a very uncomfortable truth was forming. I'd loaned £510,000 to someone I'd known for less than 6 months, someone who'd now effectively vanished. I contacted a lawyer in Manila, showed him the contract. This is enforceable, he said. You have a solid legal claim, but collecting will be difficult. Why? We have a signed agreement, notarized. Yes, but if she has no assets, there's nothing to collect. Do you know what assets she has? She showed me bank statements when we first met. She seemed to have healthy cash flow. Bank statements can be faked. Do you know if she owns property, has business assets, anything we could potentially seize if you win a judgment? I realized I had no idea. I'd seen impressive spreadsheets and professional documents, but I'd never actually verified what she owned. What are my options? You can file a civil suit for breach of contract, but it will take years and cost you substantial legal fees, and even if you win, collection is not guaranteed. So I might never see that money again. He looked at me sympathetically. I've seen cases like this before. Foreign investors, usually older men, loan large sums to local professionals based on documentation that looks legitimate. The documentation is real, but the borrower never intended to repay. She made payments for the first several months. Of course, that's how the scheme works. Make a few payments to establish credibility, then disappear once you have the bulk of the money. I didn't want to believe it. Isla had seemed so professional, so genuine. What about criminal charges? This is fraud. Proving fraud requires showing criminal intent. She can claim she intended to repay, but circumstances prevented it. Unless you have evidence she deliberately deceived you from the start, criminal charges likely won't stick. I left his office feeling numb. I'd spent 50 years in banking. I knew how these schemes worked. I'd warned clients about them. I'd reviewed thousands of loans and could spot red flags instantly. And I'd walked right into the most obvious trap imaginable. I tried one more time to reach Isla, sent a formal letter through a lawyer demanding repayment within 30 days. She responded through her own lawyer. The letter acknowledged the debt, claimed she fully intended to honor the agreement, but stated that due to unforeseen financial hardships, she was unable to make payments at present. She requested a 12-month grace period to restructure her business and resume payments. My lawyer was skeptical. This is a stalling tactic. She's trying to buy time. But she's acknowledging the debt. That's something. Yes, but acknowledgement without payment is meaningless. I authorized him to file a civil suit. The legal process was exactly as slow and frustrating as he'd warned. Court dates kept getting postponed. Isla's lawyer filed motion after motion for delays. She claimed health issues, family emergencies, business complications. 6 months into the legal process, my lawyer called me. I've discovered something troubling. Isla Reyes has filed for bankruptcy. What does that mean for my claim? It means you're now an unsecured creditor in a bankruptcy proceeding. You'll get in line with everyone else she owes money to. Who else does she owe? From the bankruptcy filing, at least 8 other creditors, total debts of approximately £1.2 million. I felt sick. I wasn't her only victim. She'd been running this scheme with multiple people simultaneously. How much can I expect to recover? Bankruptcy proceedings can take years, and if her liabilities exceed her assets, creditors typically recover pennies on the pound. You might see 5 to 10% of your claim eventually. Maybe 5 to 10% of £510,000. I'd potentially lost over £450,000. At 74 years old, that money represented most of my liquid net worth, my safety net, my security, and it was gone. I sat in my apartment in Manila, staring at the loan agreement. Every page was properly formatted. Every clause was clear. Everything was signed and notarized. The documentation was perfect and completely worthless. I started digging deeper into Isla's background, things I should have done before giving her the money. The business registration was real, but the business had only been registered 8 months before I met her, not 3 years, as she'd claimed. The testimonials from satisfied investors were fake. I tracked down 2 of the names. They'd never heard of Isla Reyes. The bank statements showing healthy cash flows were doctored. I compared them to genuine bank statement formats. The fonts were slightly different. The formatting was off. The developer references were either fabricated or the developers had no record of working with her. Everything she'd shown me was carefully constructed fiction, and I'd believed all of it because it looked professional, because it matched the kind of documentation I'd spent my career reviewing. I'd been so confident in my ability to evaluate financial arrangements that I never considered I might be looking at forgeries. My daughter flew out from London when I finally told her what had happened. She was furious. "Dad, how could you do something like this? Give away your entire savings to someone you barely knew." I had a contract, legal documentation. I did due diligence. You did paperwork review. That's not the same as due diligence. Did you verify any of the information she gave you? She showed me bank statements, business registrations, references. Did you independently verify them? Call the banks? Check with the business registry? Contact the references directly? I couldn't answer. "Dad, you're a banker. You know better than this." I thought I was being smart. It was a loan, not a gift. I had legal protection. Legal protection is only useful if there's something to collect. Did you even check if she had assets? She seemed successful, professional. She was an accountant. For God's sake. Criminals can be accountants too. She was right. I'd let surface-level professionalism blind me to the lack of substance underneath. "Why didn't you talk to me before doing this?" she asked, her anger giving way to sadness. "Because I knew you'd tell me not to." "Exactly." We sat in silence for a while. "What happens now?" she asked. "I wait for the bankruptcy process to play out, hope to recover something, probably lose most of it." "Can you afford that?" I'd been avoiding thinking about that question. "I'll have to adjust my lifestyle significantly. I won't be destitute, but retirement will look very different than I planned." "Come home, Dad. Come back to London." "I can't afford to live in London anymore." That reality hit both of us hard. "Then live with me. I have the space. I'm not going to be a burden on you." "You're not a burden. You're my father." But I couldn't do it. Couldn't face going back to London broke and humiliated. Everyone would know what I'd done, how foolish I'd been. At least in the Philippines, I was anonymous. Just another retiree who'd made bad decisions. The bankruptcy proceedings dragged on for 18 months. During that time, I had to accept some hard truths. The £510,000 was gone. I'd never see the majority of it again. Isla had been running a sophisticated fraud operation. The few payments she'd made early on were just bait to keep me trusting her while she worked on bringing in more victims. My professional expertise meant nothing when I was emotionally invested. I'd wanted to feel useful, valued, connected to something meaningful. That emotional need had blinded me to obvious warning signs. Documentation without verification is just paper. Eventually, the bankruptcy trustee issued a final report. Isla's total assets were valued at approximately £140,000. Her debts exceeded £1.2 million. As an unsecured creditor owed £510,000, I received a distribution of £8,400, less than 2% of what I'd loaned. I spent most of my career helping people make sound financial decisions. I understood risk assessment. I knew how to read financial statements. I could spot irregularities in documentation. And yet I'd lost £501,600 to a fraud so obvious that my daughter saw through it in minutes. The money was gone. But what hurt more was the humiliation. I'd been so certain I was being smart, so confident in my approach. I had a contract. I had documentation. I had professional expertise. None of it mattered. Isla had counted on exactly that. She'd targeted professionals, especially older men from financial backgrounds, because they were overconfident in their ability to evaluate deals based on paperwork. The better the documentation looked, the less likely we were to verify it. She understood that people like me trusted process more than instinct. If the forms were filled out correctly, we assumed the deal was legitimate. I found out later that I wasn't even her most profitable victim. She'd taken a retired German banker for £680,000, using exactly the same approach. He'd also had a bulletproof contract. He'd also done thorough due diligence based on the documents she provided. We'd both made the same mistake, confusing documentation with security. I tried to find Isla after the bankruptcy concluded. She'd vanished completely. No social media presence, no business registrations, no contact information. Someone told me she'd moved to Singapore. Someone else said Dubai. Another person claimed she'd returned to a small province and was living quietly under a different name. I'd never know for sure. What I did know was that she'd stolen my life savings and faced no real consequences. The bankruptcy discharge meant she no longer legally owed me anything. The civil judgment I'd worked so hard to obtain was now unenforceable. She'd won completely. 2 years after I gave her that first payment, I was living in a small apartment in a cheaper part of Manila. My retirement looked nothing like I'd planned. I couldn't afford to return to London, couldn't afford the lifestyle I'd expected, couldn't afford much of anything beyond basic expenses. My daughter sent me money sometimes. I hated accepting it, but I had no choice. I'd gone from being the financially secure retired banker to being dependent on my daughter's charity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent a lot of time thinking about how it happened, how I'd been so thoroughly deceived. The answer was uncomfortable but clear. I'd been lonely. My wife had died. My career was over. I felt invisible and useless. Isla made me feel valuable again. She sought my advice, respected my expertise, made me feel like I still had something to contribute. That emotional need made me want the deal to be legitimate. So I looked at her documentation and saw what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. I performed due diligence on the paperwork but not on the person. I verified that the contract was well drafted but not that the business was real. I confirmed that the signatures were notarized but not that the bank statements were genuine. I did everything except the things that actually mattered. And it cost me everything. I met another one of Isla's victims about a year after the bankruptcy concluded. James, a retired Australian accountant. He'd lost £380,000 in an almost identical scheme. "I still can't believe I fell for it," he said over coffee. "I reviewed financial statements my entire career. How did I not see that hers were fake?" "Because we wanted to believe," I said. "We were both lonely, both looking for purpose, both flattered that someone valued our expertise. Do you think she specifically targeted professionals? Absolutely. We're the easiest marks because we trust our own judgment too much. We sat in silence for a while. Have you forgiven yourself? He asked. No. Have you? Not even close. We met occasionally after that. Two old men who'd been outplayed by someone smarter and more ruthless than we'd realized. It helped to talk to someone who understood the specific type of humiliation we felt. It wasn't just losing money. It was losing it in a way that proved we weren't as smart as we thought we were. Now, at 76, I live simply, very simply. I have enough to get by, barely. My pension covers rent and food. My daughter helps with extras. The £510,000 is gone. So is the retirement I'd planned. So is my confidence in my own judgment. What I have instead is clarity. I understand now that documentation means nothing without verification, that professional credentials don't equal trustworthiness, that loneliness makes you vulnerable in ways that expertise can't protect against. I understand that at 74, with decades of banking experience, I was just as susceptible to fraud as anyone else, maybe more so because I was arrogant enough to think I couldn't be fooled. Isla knew exactly what she was doing. She studied her targets, understood what would make us trust her, created elaborate documentation because she knew professionals would trust paper more than people. And it worked perfectly. She's somewhere in the world now, probably running the same scheme on someone else. Maybe she's already found her next victim, another lonely professional who thinks his expertise will protect him. I hope whoever it is sees the red flags I missed, but I doubt they will. Because the thing about confidence tricks is that they work on confident people, and professionals are the most confident of all. We think we can't be fooled because we've spent careers spotting deception. We're wrong. I lost £510,000 because I had a contract, because I did due diligence, because I was a banker who knew how these things worked. The loan was never meant to be repaid. The documentation was always worthless. The deal was fraud from the beginning. I just couldn't see it until it was too late. And now I live with the consequences every single day. Not just the financial loss, though that's substantial, but the knowledge that I failed at the one thing I thought I was best at, evaluating risk. Turns out, I'm not very good at it after all.